everyone. Welcome to another edition, I don't know what to call it, of People Talk with Paul Lawrence. My name obviously is Paul Lawrence, I would hope so. And we've been doing these Facebook Lives for a number of weeks now. And today, I think it was important for us to focus on something which has been always in existence in our communities, and that is domestic violence. Before we get into the discussion and the meat of the matter, I just want to make a couple of bits and pieces very clear. So for the next hour or so, we're going to be talking about domestic violence, and I'm not apologizing for the fact that the emphasis will be domestic violence against women. And one of the reasons why I'm not apologizing for that is not to dismiss the domestic violence against men, but because of the raw basic statistic, which is just very, very simple. You know, the rates of domestic violence against women is twice of that which it is of men. And that's the reported cases. And so I don't want anyone to say, well, why aren't they talking about men as well? Yeah, we're very aware, but we're talking about really what is far, far, far more. And it just feels like an epidemic, you know, we're in the words of using that language nowadays when it comes to stuff. So that's the position we're coming from. If I talk to you very briefly about what made me think that this topic needed to be discussed again, because anybody who's got their eyes open will know that this topic has been discussed far and wide. I know my friend Lee Jasper had a great session yesterday, very much touching on the same topic. I would just say that I did plan to have it before him, so that's number one. But, you know, over the last 8 weeks under the COVID lockdown, the UK has seen a 25% increase in the reports, and that's just the reports of domestic violence. In France, that's been 30%, just in the first week alone. In Brazil, it was 50%. Yeah. So we need to understand that this is not just something which has been around for a long time. This is something which has been escalated and is getting even worse nowadays under COVID. And there are a number of reasons for that, and that's part and parcel of what we want to explore today. I have a number of guests who have joined me, and as usual, all my guests have joined me on time, and I'm pretty happy about that. And I think it's important that we just take a moment before we get into this, just to talk very, very briefly, because I don't want to divert from the topic, about other things that are going on in our communities and our societies. And I think it would be remiss of me not to just try to put some context on just some of the stuff that's taken place this week. You know, you'd have to be in a deep rabbit hole for you not to have known or heard about what's taken place in terms of that killing in Minneapolis. Guys, I don't know what to say to you, but all I do know is that when you beat someone and you beat them relentlessly, constantly, for years, ongoing, and they cry, you can't tell them not to cry. That's just not allowed. And so for you to tell us that, you know, perhaps there's a different way for people to express their anger, I don't think you have that right. I don't think you have the right to tell people who are feeling pain how to express the pain they're feeling. No, I don't think it's going to make a difference. I don't think it's going to create any great change. I don't think it's going to bring about the end of racism or even the end of police killings. I don't. But I don't think we have the right to tell people how to express their pain. And anybody who disagrees with that, that's cool. That's 100% your right to do. But that's just where I stand. You know, I only regret I have is that my show, unfortunately, is just a weekly show. And so by the time I set the topic, events just tend to take over and different things pop into the limelight. The fortunate thing about this week's show is that this topic is so very, very important that it really doesn't matter what else happens. This topic will always stand very strongly by itself. That's enough from me. Yep. Everybody knows that I try to make these events very jovial and, you know, have a little laugh. I'm not sure if I can do that on this topic. I'm going to hope that the experts, and that's what I'm calling the four guests I have, will be able to, I don't know, if there is a lighter side, bring it out. If not, just bear with us. It's that type of a topic. So if there is no lighter side, that's it. So this week, I am very, very blessed that I have 4, soon to be 5 ladies and no men. Yeah, no men on the call today, just me. So eat your hearts out. And I'm going to ask each of them to introduce themselves as my normal thing. And I'm going to start with the first person who signed on, which was Sarah.
Hi, everyone. My name's Sarah, and I have worked in women's services for just over 20 years, and that's both with domestic violence and sexual violence. I currently work for a charity, a sexual violence charity in Birmingham, and I deliver specialist sexual violence training to public, private, statutory and the voluntary sector. A lot of it deals with trauma. We're looking at the trauma of abuse, historical child abuse, sexual violence and rape. We also look at CSE and things like that. So, and also vicarious trauma for support workers who are supporting survivors of sexual violence. I've worked for Women's Aid. I was one of the first cohorts, one of the first IDVA cohorts back in 2005. And I've worked in the criminal justice system supporting women who are experiencing domestic violence. And I've also worked in refuge as well. And I've delivered training in domestic violence. So basically, for the last 20 years, that has been my professional working thing that I've done. So yeah, that's me in a nutshell.
Thanks, Sarah. Jackie?
Hi, my name's Jackie Burton from Manchester, and I'm a survivor of domestic abuse, which went on over a period of about 17 years. I also shared my story a few years ago on Facebook, and out of that, there were about 5,500 women that saw that story. And out of that, we then set up a group called Women of Worth that seeks to empower women who have experienced domestic abuse, and also to raise awareness in communities, in particular in the Black communities, because we found that there is this wall of silence and people do not speak about what is going on. And so we're hoping to change that narrative and to link with people across the globe, really, and to raise awareness for everybody around domestic abuse. I'm also a mentor, coach, and a personal trainer.
Thank you very much. Donna?
Hi, my name's Donna Murray Turner. I lead an organisation called Another Night of Sisterhood. And in terms of this topic, we have used our platform to kind of create that whole community education piece about domestic abuse, about domestic violence. I'm also a local domestic abuse champion here in the borough of Croydon, and I sit on a number of female violence forums, such as the Violence Against Women group. And this is really just grassroots organizations who have set themselves up to deal with the issues around and because of violence against females. And it's a really good group, and I like the fact that it sits outside of the statutory and public, as Sarah has mentioned, because I think often it takes the grassroots perhaps to reach and to bridge the gaps that statutory and public sometimes miss, and for all of the reasons that Jackie was mentioning, that whole judgment piece sometimes in the local community, and the stigma that goes with it, that still exists, big 2020. I think it's important that grassroots organizations fill those gaps and have more cultural competence and are more relatable sometimes to women who experience violence.
Thank you, Donna. Kriti.
Hello, I'm Katie Sony, and I'm an independent psychotherapist. I've been supporting women at the coalface of domestic abuse and violence for many, many years. It started off actually probably when I was about 11 or 12, and somebody very close to me was actually a victim of horrendous domestic violence, and I was supporting her. She was only about 18 or 19 at the time, and I was supporting her, and throughout my life, it's been that I've been supporting women in such situations. But as the other speaker said, in our communities, there's always a veil of secrecy and a veil of don't tell anybody. So it's always been very covert support that I've been giving. And in a lot of places, it's been overt in that I've been with them at police stations and had to help them with all the statements and things. But then again, it's, you know, back to the house and everything's hushed up and covered up. So it's been a long time that I've been supporting women in these situations. But obviously over the years, I myself have developed and progressed and do it now as an independent psychotherapist. So I get called upon either privately or through agencies. At the moment, I'm heading up COVID-19 mental health support group. And of course, through there, we get a lot of private messages and things coming in where men and women are in such situations, and we're supporting them. And I also work at a youth and community charity in Buckinghamshire, where we support the age 13 to 25-year-olds. So even there we get domestic abuse cases coming through. In addition to that, I do a lot of work with universities. And I don't know if this may surprise you or not surprise you, but in universities, we get students coming to us who are living in student households and where they're also subjected to this kind of behavior, either from fellow housemates or if they're having a relationship at university with somebody. So it's not the conventional men, women living together with their children. It's, you know, domestic abuse and domestic violence seems to have sort of seeped its, I mean, I don't know how to describe it. Its tentacles have gone out in all sorts of relationships, men with men, women with women, all sorts of communities. And everywhere, unfortunately, the common theme is this shroud of secrecy because of the stigma. So I'm there reaching out in lots of different ways and supporting wherever I can.
Okay, thank you so much for all the introduction. I think I'm going to stick with you and ask you a question which I didn't really think of before. You know, your point about, you know, domestic violence and abuse steeping into places like universities, which I'm going to be straight, I was not aware of.
I was horrified the first time a student came into my room, because I am that person that sits in a university with a private room because everybody knows Kirsty's going to get all sorts of, because I never know what the student's going to bring to me, because that's student welfare, advice and support. It's a safe space. It's somewhere they can come to. And if they feel they can trust the person, they will come into the room and spill anything. So the first time a student brought that into, I was working at a local university here. Even after all my years of experience and seeing it in its different forms and, you know, different situations, but I never expected that to come into my room at the university. So it was very surprising.
Two quick questions. How long ago was that? And what do you think is facilitating that sort of rise?
Okay, that was probably about the first time that it came to me was probably about 5 or 6 years ago. And facilitating, I'm not sure that it's so much facilitating, but I think it's more that now that more and more students are going to university over the years, as you've seen, there's been a rise in more students going off to university. So they're leaving homes at a very young age. My work is almost always with widening participation universities. And that's because it's a personal thing to me as a young Asian girl who wasn't able to go to university. I made it my thing that I would help youngsters from the BAME communities who wanted to go to universities get their goal or get their dream. So typically I go and help out in in widening participation universities. And there I found it is youngsters who have come from households where they probably weren't adequately prepared for everything that university life offers. So there's a little bit of that unsurety, there's a little bit of that confidence building, the self-esteem building. And of course, with BME communities, we do still have this little bit of the patriarchal system, even though more and more girls are going off to university. And I'm going to speak more from the female perspective because that's what there is more of, but it happens to boys and girls.
Thank you so much. Donna, going off to the meat of the matter, which is the rise during lockdown. Are you guys down in Anos, down in Croydon, seeing the manifestation of that rise?
100%. And during lockdown, we created, Anos is every month, as you know, Paul. And I just realized with everybody being in their homes, so we put together something we've called Community Take a Break, and we call it Team Biscuits Club, and it's on every Tuesday to Friday. And on a Monday, a group of us meet together to kind of strategize for the programs we're going to put out for that week. And when we first put it together, one of our first meetings was about domestic violence. And we're fortunate here in Croydon. And the reason I'm going to say we're fortunate is that we have a dedicated organization at council level. It's called the Family Justice Centre, that is dedicated. So it has its own funding for supporting women and families who are subject to domestic abuse. But yeah, definitely as a community influencer, I saw the curve a long time. I was like, these people are going to be locked down. There's no getting away. I remember speaking to a couple of headmistresses and just saying, there's no phoning that particular service on your way to school run. There is no school run. There is no, this person, your perpetrator, and I'm going to say he, because you said, Paul, we're speaking about women predominantly. He can follow you anywhere. It's not going to seem out of the norm. And so one of the things that we've created here in Croydon are safe spaces and supermarkets and local pharmacies, because those are the only things that are open, are involved. And if a person comes in and says, sorry about that, if a person comes in and says that they need help, this is how they access the help. But yes, we've definitely seen a dramatic rise because everybody's in the home together. And when we talk about domestic violence, again, I know that we're talking about adult women in the main, but I also want to bring in here about girls and the section of domestic violence. And again, it's the same cauldron. Everybody's at home. Everybody should be in. So, that whole thing about vulnerable children, vulnerable adolescents has really been a testing piece because we're all indoors. And if it was dysfunctional before, you need only guess at the levels of dysfunctionality now that there's no respite from it. And there's no real intervention from statutory services because they can't get in. So this is where grassroots organizations and quick thinking in terms of creating online platforms has been essential and has been leading the way in kind of opening that conversation and bringing it to the grassroots. So yeah, that's what we've been doing here in Croydon.
Jackie, you're up in Manchester, right?
Mm-hmm, yeah.
Has Donna's experience mirrored your experience up there? Is your organization having the same sort of feed?
We're getting more and more over the last, I'd say, 2 weeks. The activity on the group has just risen and risen, and a lot of women sort of inboxing privately. about their own situations and things like that. And I think the way that it's the media's kind of reporting on this kind of thing makes it sound as though suddenly all these, because everyone's locked up together, you get men that suddenly become violent. But what it is really, it's this behaviour that has already been happening in the home is just getting more and more because the opportunity is there, because everybody is in one space, as Donna was saying. And also the fact that the stress levels are high for everybody because they're locked up. So it's just making women more and more vulnerable. And if you've got children, you know, it's not as easy to just kind of up and run off somewhere. You've got to consider those children as well, who again would have had respite by going to school. They're not having that respite, so they're having to witness this. So I think what we're seeing is that what's happening here now, I believe, is going to have an impact for a long, long time after this COVID has disappeared.
Yeah, I think you know, when I was you know, doing a little bit of reading again on the notes I had from DV stuff I had many years ago, I remember one statistic, which I don't know how much has changed over the years, but the statistic I heard was around, you know, the average person is abused 37 times before they pluck up the courage to leave. You know, I don't know if it's gone up or down, you know, it really doesn't matter. But it was just so, I'm not going to say shocking, it was just so odd to me that, you know, the number was so high, 37 times. But then I refocused myself and I thought about the entire, the removal of people's self-esteem, which is part and parcel of the cycle of abuse, and why it leaves people who otherwise are totally functional, strong people unable to respond. So Sarah, just talk to us about what you're seeing. I mean, I guess, you know, you're in Birmingham, so we've done Croydon, we've done Birmingham, done Manchester. You know, do we have the full house? Is it very much the same?
Yeah, it is very much the same here. There's also invisible victims as well. So there are children that are in homes that probably would get respite, as Donna said, by going to school, and now they're not able to go to school. So if somebody had even a healthy relationship in this lockdown period has been challenged and compromised, if it's a very dysfunctional relationship where there is abuse, that's going to be magnified and compounded so much more because there's no access to get away, and a perpetrator has a lot more control now in where that woman can go, where those children can go. So whereas Donna said, you know, you can make a call to a service on the school run, now you can't. If you go shopping, the perpetrator might want to come shopping with you because the perpetrator wants to control you. Also, we're thinking about children who have also become the invisible victims. What we're thinking about, perpetrators don't just, there used to be a belief that the perpetrator abused the woman abused the kids abused, the children, and the children abuse the pets. But actually it's the perpetrator that abuses everybody in the family, including the pets. So if you have somebody who is perpetrating domestic violence, you always find another form of abuse somewhere in the house, okay? It's never just, oh, he beats up mum. There's always some kind of other abuse. So we're thinking about children that may also be being sexually abused, being neglected. These signs, these children, that they're not being picked up at because they're in lockdown, and the service provision has been so dramatically cut because of austerity that workers aren't able to sort of do outreach, even with technology now, trying to get into someone's home now, even to do a safe and well check, is very, very compromised. So we're seeing a risk also, birth control, abortions, all of these kind of things. Women have very little access. You know, Mary Stopes, I think, had an increase in so many calls, and it was women that were 18 plus trying to access termination services. So all of these things they're all pieces to the same pie as to why it's higher. And I think our government hasn't really paid attention, because domestic violence has a massive hit on the economy. I think it costs the economy, I need my notes, but I don't have them. I think it's 5.5 billion, okay, that's impacting in job losses, impacting on the NHS. A magistrate trial costs like 30 grand. So it has a massive impact economically. And to then cut all the services, it's no wonder why in a pandemic we are seeing it rise, because there's no service provision to manage it.
Wow. I think, you know, my next question was around what you guys saw, if at all, in terms of the sort of preparedness that was put in place. Because, you know, if you're from a Black or Asian family, then you knew that about 4 weeks in, we were told that we were being affected more than any other group. And, you know, we sort of got that rhetoric, we got that. But it's very clear to me that there are other victims of the lockdown that don't get the same sort of highlighting. So I've seen a couple of articles around domestic violence. I know the Irish government have a massive campaign around, you know, trying to help ladies to get through. But I've not really seen any sort of emphasis, and maybe I've missed it. Jackie, have I just missed it? Is it there and I've missed it? Has the government done anything to your knowledge?
There have been a few attempts, but obviously not good enough as far as I'm concerned. So, for example, during lockdown, women are allowed to travel. You can flee your home without any recourse because you're fleeing. There's also the Virgin have offered free train rides to anybody who needs to leave their area. Also, they've done something in Boots where you can go into Boots and say a coded word, and Boots will know what you know that you're fleeing from domestic abuse. But as far as I'm concerned, it is not enough, because it's missing still a whole other group of people who just cannot sort of fit into that remit. So, for example, those women who do not have recourse to public funds, you know, women who are fleeing violence fleeing from other countries and are here, who have no support, no mechanisms. As Sarah was saying, there has been massive cuts which impacted long before we went into COVID, and if it's impacted then, it's going to impact even more so now. And I think we're only getting kind of like the tip of what is happening, and we probably won't know the full effect of that until we come right out of this. So I don't think they've done enough by any measure, and now they're trying to put things out, but it's not reaching where it needs to reach. We're talking about, Donna mentioned about the work on the grassroots level. Those people who can be out there reaching those people, they're not getting support in terms of financial or any other. So those women are still going to be suffering. So not enough as far as I'm concerned, and not thought through enough at all.
I think it's very much the same old tale, isn't it? Because all of the social services, whether grassroots or other, were already being cut, we're already on the strain, we're already struggling from a lack of funding. And now to be put into this situation where we are now, it's just exacerbated the situation, and all of these things are now more. Donna, you're down in Croydon, you have good, strong links into the local government, and I know that. How's their response been?
Well, I mean, just this week, we've had press releases saying just how much in debt Croydon is. We're not quite bankrupt, but we're nearly there. Obviously, the money that was spent in the first few weeks of COVID, where there was this massive shock and different way of living, and all of the kind of grassroots organizations that went out there and could present and deliver things that couldn't be done by statutory, and I know this is not a political conversation, so I'm just going to say that central government said, don't worry, spend it now, we'll give it back to you later. We're now being told, we're now going to get it. So, and we are on the precipice of a recession. I think we all know that, we can see that. I don't think I'm saying anything that anybody listening to your show or that's on the panel. So if we think it's bad now, it's about to get, and we know that these cuts, for me, when I was hearing Kirti talk, and Jackie, you know, if you've got a person who's allowed to travel, yeah, and they're a BAME woman with her children, the implicit bias I'm currently seeing, and we're all seeing played out on our streets in London. If she's fleeing and she doesn't feel like telling the officers exactly what's going on, is she really going to receive the help that she needs? Or is there going to be more trauma added to the trauma of her trying to leave the trauma that was pre-existing? These, as a community influencer, this is why spaces like this are brilliant, because we have to talk about things like this. We know, and I'm sure my sisters on this panel know, that in terms of violence against women, Black women and Asian women are impacted more because of our cultural sensitivities.
Absolutely.
So already the majority of these services don't meet our threshold in terms of cultural competence. So here in Croydon, there is whole conversation around that, and I'm really exploring opening up conversations about implicit bias. That's my day job anyway, but for me, so much of that is going to impact during a recession. So if you think it's bad now, just kind of pull us back. During a recession, if those services that have that structural bias, so it's embedded in their policies, in the way their staff talk to women, deal with them, the mindset that thinks I'm going to an Asian home, okay, she's going to be mousy, she's not going to speak, the implicit bias that says, as has happened to me, well, you know, she's a big Black woman, how come she can't look after herself? All of these things, if we're not going to have conversations about the structure of some of these services and how they don't meet our thresholds, then are we not carrying, when we're failing to carry out due diligence for our sisters who look like us and come from the cultures that we do? Whilst I'm not sideswiping the main culture, I'm saying I want to see more services delivered that meet our needs. And I know they're out there, and I just can't reach my phone at them to Google any of them and mention them, but a big shout out to them. And I want to see more of that, because when I've attended some of we have one in Croydon called the Lioness Circle, and she recently had a launch, and it was so empowering. It was so empowering to see a room full of BAME women, and there was kind of like this kind of psychological contract. We have an understanding, our cultures are very similar, and we are immigrants to this place. So we know about judgment. We know about perhaps not revealing. We know about telling little Johnny, and don't say anything when you get to school. Yeah, it might be rubbish in here, but the last thing I want is school. They'll take you away if you talk, you know. We know that. So for me, it's really about having conversations with like-minded individuals to create cultural competence spaces at the lower level and beyond if needs be, but where our sisters can speak. Because I found that where you present more commonality, the dialogue is rich, but you have to create that space first.
You do.
It's very rewarding and empowering to hear all of you speak so far. It's just, you know, for me, you know, I won't say much about my history when it comes to DV, but there's something that you guys said earlier, which really touches on me, which is that very often, I don't think there's an understanding from either the perpetrator or the authorities that DV does not just abuse the direct victim, but there are children in the home who walk away with those things as well. And so when we're exploring all of the cuts, because that's what they were, all of the removal of everything, the whole structure to support, let's start with the direct victim down to the young people around and access, all of that was gone. And what all of you have said to me so far, which I can only but accept as rings true, I just need to look out my window and know it rings true, is that you are now locked in. You are now locked in with that person and told, stay at home, stay safe. You know, that's how.
Can I just say something quickly, just so I don't lose my train of thought? During the lockdown, there was a lot of mixed messages coming internationally about what women can do during the lockdown. So we had Billy Joe, the boxer, who's had his boxing license suspended for teaching men how to punch their girlfriends during the lockdown. Okay, so there's a full video, you can still see it online, of Billy Joe. This is a boxer saying, you know, when she's giving you a bit of mouth, just, you know, chin her. And then we had the Malaysian government come out and suggest that during the lockdown, women shouldn't nag, and women should take care of their appearance, and women should obviously make themselves, in inverted commas, sexually available for their husbands. And the emphasis of domestic violence, just like the issue of racism is not a black issue, it's a white issue. The issue of domestic violence is not the women, it's not the survivors. Okay, domestic violence isn't a women's issue. Domestic violence is a perpetrator. It's a male issue, and it's rooted in patriarchy, it's rooted in supremacy. And what we have to recognize as a wider society, even when what we need to recognize, even in our community, even in the Black and Asian community, there is a level of patriarchy. Okay, there is a level of patriarchy. Black women are seen to especially be, the primary caregivers, and we don't carry our business that happens in the bedroom into the living room, and we shh the little pickiny them, and we're not telling our business, we're not speaking out about it, and we're not sometimes looking at the dynamics. What's happened with austerity is the bigger charities, I'm not going to name them, but the bigger charities that get a lot of money from central funding, they have then taken over the smaller specialist charities that are dealing with supremacy and racism and bias and cultural competence again. So because they're the big players in service provision, they've taken over the smaller specialist agencies that Black and Asian women would go to, where there was cultural competency, where there was a cultural understanding, where there was, if language was a barrier, people are speaking the same language, they had specialist refuges, they worked in a way that was culturally competent for service users. Those things have been lost. So now you phone a line, and perhaps you get this person, or you get, everything's been streamlined. And I'm not going to politicize it, but I am. Most of these organizations have no senior Black managers. They have no senior Black managers in place. They may have one Asian manager, but on the boards, the chief exec, the assistant chief exec, these are not Black women. These are usually middle-class white women, or women who have worked themselves up in the organizations. So when we talk about domestic violence in the Black community, we need to throw away what we already have. We need to look at breaking that structure, reorganizing that structure, and allowing Black women and Asian women to speak for themselves. Even when we look at things like, and I know I'm going on a bit of a rant, but I know that I'm going to have to go in a bit, and I want to get this out before I forget it. Even when we look at forced marriage, it is not the platform for a white feminist in women's services to be talking about forced marriage. It is for the Asian community to take that platform and to speak about forced marriage. It is not the white feminist to come and talk about FGM that happens in particularly the Muslim community. It is for the Muslim woman to come in and talk about it. And what we keep on getting all the time is white organizations coming in like a big whale and swallowing up Jonah.
I can only...
just to add to Sarah's point.
No, not to add, Curti, you're up.
But just to add to Sarah's point, one of the problems is that all the funding goes to those big white whale organizations, and the smaller grassroots on the ground organizations are either funding it out of their own pocket or out of the goodness of their families, friends, anybody else that's helping them provide these services. They're using their own mobile phones and networks to receive all these calls, to give all these women this support, to put petrol in their car and drive them to a refuge. And all these activities are just done by the grassroots people out of their own pocket, because to try and get any of the money that the government allocates these big setup organizations is an absolute nightmare. They make people jump through hoops and hurdles galore. By the time you get it, the other person, the victim, has probably ended up in A&E or beaten back and blue, because you've been trying to tick all the boxes and cross all the hurdles and fill all the forms of these organizations for this person here. So rather than waste time doing that, you end up just doing it all yourself. You get them the extra clothing, you take them and their children to a safe refuge. You might even just take them to your own home because you don't know where to take them, and it's 3 a.m. in the morning or something. And it's just people down at ground level who are doing this, and the government's thinking that they're doing all the right thing. They've brought out a domestic abuse bill, they've allocated extra funding. I think around April time, Priti Patel made a big statement on domestic abuse and how it won't be tolerated, but it hasn't filtered down here to the ground. It hasn't filtered to us. So that's
what should they be doing different? What should they be doing differently?
Government.
But
I think
I'm still talking to Curtis.
Oh, sorry.
What should they be doing differently?
Firstly, I think these big organizations that are getting all the funding, I think they should be enlisting and looking at people like you have here on the panel, people who are down grassroots, other people who are in the community who are supporting these ladies at grassroots level, and the children, like we said, all the way down the line, and engaging with them to find out, okay, go to them and say, what is it that you need to help us deal with this evil in the community? Speak to the people who are dealing with it on a daily basis, the ones who are receiving, private messages on our messenger, who are receiving unknown number phone calls and WhatsApp messages from people in distress. Talk to the people who are in the front line and ask them, what can we do? We have this pot of money. We're central government. We have this pot of money, which we're allocating to DV or DA, whatever they want to call it, and talk to them, engage with them, and find out where it needs to go and how it needs to go. Work with us.
Donna, you were going to say.
I was listening rapturously. And see, the problem is, and I know this is not what we came here to talk about, but to do everything that Curtis just said would require one to give away power. And that's the problem. You cannot expect people who have always walked into places and said, cease and desist with what you've been doing and come and do what we've been doing, do what we say because we've said it. It's a mindset that is very pervasive and is the bedrock of some of these structures. So for them to go to somebody like Curtis or Sarah or Jackie and say, listen, we don't know what we're doing here, but we want to hear from your voice, is to give that's an exchange of power. That's saying, I don't have the power to deliver this, but I'm going to give it to you. And that's the problem. These larger organizations that are not fit to deal with some of the problems that we see in our local communities, they're not really, because you see, when you give away power, then you start giving away funding. Then and it's all about money, as I know you understand, Paul. Money and power are intrinsic. So for you to come to a grassroots level and say, or to any level, professionals who are Black, I like Sarah's point about that in the senior leadership teams, are always a poor reflection of actually the work that's going on within that organization. And why is that? Because people are reluctant to hand over power. They know that they cannot deal with what's before them. They know that they have no insight. One of the best things I've ever been part of is a white social work manager here in Croydon who came to me and said, listen, you're the person that can work with parents. I don't have what you have, come. And she walked with me. Now that, as a person, that takes a lot to say, look, I don't have the power to do this. But if you're talking about like local government, there's no way central government, they ain't going to hand over that power, because at the end of the day, it's not the dominant culture, so it doesn't really matter. And that has to be said. I think it's important to use platforms like this to really speak to the heart of it. People don't want to give power to the more effective community organizations, because then it takes away from their friends that they do barbecues with and they attend events with. And this is real. And what's happening, as Curtis has said, is on the lower levels, the trickle-down effect is those women at the bottom, those families at the bottom still don't get the help, still are 3, 6 weeks, 18 months without services. Community endeavors that are supporting them, we're not getting any funding. I mean, I had to put in a bid the other day just for tea and biscuits. Paul, I thought it was an aerobics workout. What they never wanted me to put in there left to be, and this was just a constituted group. So I can only imagine what it must be if you're a CIC or whatever kind of institution you are, to jump through these hoops. But of course, if you're a larger organization, you are already set up to do all of these things. And so you will continually, and once you've had funding once, people will say, oh, we'll give you more funding because we see that your application to so. These are all the small things that we don't get to talk about, and that hinders, I'm sure, from my sister in Manchester and from Sarah and from Curti, many of the lower level organizations from going forward and expanding and really creating that help, is because of the exchange of power. And until that changes, we will always be at the bottom, going to aunties and uncles and cousins and asking them to help us with our endeavors, as we have always done in the poorer communities. And I think that's where it needs to start. I'm not really bothered about the top, but I am, and I live at the bottom. So for me, it's that resilience piece. What can we do with nothing? Okay, we can create tea and biscuits, which will allow women to come on for free and talk, and we can hopefully signpost them. This is the way we have always coped, and I don't think it's, and I'm not embarrassed to say I will continue to work this way, because it's effective, because it is having impact. Who wants to argue about the big funding at the top? I feel them business that. I'm down there doing the real work with little and nothing, but we're still making improvements. But yeah, it's about that power. They're not about to hand it over, because for them that will be a loss of power, and this country is all about the accruing of power. It's not about giving it out. You're crazy.
So Jackie,
Can I just add to that?
my
Sorry.
question to you, Jackie, is this:
Oh.
we ain't getting the big funding in the short term.
No.
What would someone who needs your services, what would they encounter? How would they contact you? What would they encounter? What are you able to do with the little resources you have now? What are you doing now?
We're very, very limited in terms of what we can do. And I kind of echo what Donna was saying. Our organisation, we rely solely on the goodwill of other women who have experienced this and understand the need to make sure that we have some kind of a service. So women can contact us, and we will either signpost to other organisations, because we don't have the facilities. And like you said, because all the women that we kind of work with have their jobs that they have to do, so this is all done in between their own kind of thing. So taking time out, for example, to fill out an application form where they ask you, they want your life basically for a very small amount. It's all very time consuming. So we are very limited. So we have the Facebook group where we can bring people in on and do live.
What's the name of the Facebook group?
It's called Women of Worth, but with empower in brackets, because there are a few women of worth. So we kind of like, we meet a lot on the Facebook group. We have events. We were just about to have a very big event of the bringing together of women and celebrating women, but obviously COVID put a stop to that. But we're hoping that, and we had the support of Judy Love with that. So we're really kind of looking forward to celebrating the essence of who we were as women, not necessarily what we had been through, and to raise that awareness. Because what I found is that a lot of women, if it's not happening to them, then it's not their problem. But then we have to remember we have daughters, you know, nieces, etc., who you don't want to go through that cycle. So without our volunteers, I don't know how we would manage. Even just something to responding to people on the Facebook group. We're getting messages all the time. One person cannot do that. We ideally would love to have funding to employ a worker, but again, there have been massive cuts, we know that, and things are being merged. In Manchester, we don't even have a refuge for Black women. We really don't. And people say, well, you've got Women's Aid, you've got this here, you've got, when a woman's vulnerable, you want to be meeting with or going somewhere where the people can totally relate to you as a person in your vulnerability. So we're really struggling. That's one of the things that we're going to have to try and explore, is how do we manage to take some of that power back, basically, and help those women down on the ground where it matters. And very much like you, Don, I don't care about what's going on up there, I'm not interested, but as long as we can have that support to be able to work effectively with our women, and also to raise that awareness. Because if we're doing the work with the women and we're not educating the wider community, then it makes no sense. So it's got to be, you know, two-pronged.
So Sarah, I know you have to go very shortly. what I want to focus on now, as we get more or less to the end of today's show, is I want to focus on what we can do.
Ah.
Yeah, I want to focus on what we can do, because it's no problem. I've been involved in community level organizations, and so nothing you have said in terms of what we can't do surprises me. I'm a 20-year member of a male-led organization that prides itself on doing it by ourselves, going into our pockets. So I know what we can do, and I know what we do. What I'm assuming people out there in Facebook land are listening for is, what's the takeaway? What can we do? So I want to try and understand. I remember a couple of weeks ago there was this thing about a code word. What is there right now for that lady, that woman, that child, that man even, who is locked in with an abuser? What can they do, Sarah?
Okay, so what women can do now is there are 2 national dedicated domestic violence helplines. There's Refuge and there's Women's Aid. Women can call at any time 999. So those are the 3 numbers to call: Refuge, Women's Aid, and 999. Okay. In terms of the takeaway in terms of grassroots organizations, one of the things that I've been seeing is a rise in GoFundMes. Okay, setting up GoFundMes, skills sharing, getting with a black bid writer, getting with somebody that's worked at senior management. Say, for instance, like yourself, Paul, you've worked in senior management, you have a good understanding of leadership. So partnering with somebody who has the skill set to help you to write a comprehensive GoFundMe pitch, and pitch that to say, look, we need some money to set this up, then those are other ways that we can do something with nothing, instead of relying on the lottery funding or the central government funding and things like that. Because time and time again, I think it's absolutely outrageous that there's no black BME, BAMA, whatever you want to call it, refuge in Manchester, with such a population of a large BME community. So these are things that we need to highlight when we are. So anybody that's working in the sector, these are things that we need to highlight. Like, how can I get with someone that can help that? If you are a victim of DV, like as I said, as Jackie said, you can travel for free. If you are approached by the police and they ask you, what are you doing? I personally would encourage you to tell them. Okay, I would encourage you, even in spite of everything that's going on, I would encourage you to tell them, I'm experiencing domestic violence, because the police also have recourse. Okay, they also have recourse. So yeah, the 2 numbers. If you're in a home, I don't want to say it publicly, Paul, because it can put people at risk. So if anybody is experiencing domestic violence and feels that they want to reach out to somebody, you can reach out to me. You can just hit me up with a message and I'll get back to you. I'm very conscious of putting things out, because then perpetrators pick up on them and they can abuse women by doing things like that. So I don't want to put anyone at risk. That's why I'm like, listen, Refuge, domestic violence helpline, or call the police. If you are utilising the services that are out there in terms of trains and whatever to move to Refuge and the police stop you, let them know what's going on. It's for your own safety. And if anything subsequently happens to you, then at least the police were aware of what happened to you and your case can be escalated, because a woman is more at risk when she leaves the relationship than when she's in that relationship, because that power has been lost. And most of the domestic violence homicides that we hear about are usually when women have tried to leave. So don't try and be a hero. There are organizations and people that are experts in this field. Direct them to us.
Boy, it just sounds like, I don't want to be despondent, but it just sounds so hard. If you try to leave, it's worse. Because what the news is saying now is that as a lockdown gets lifted, and some of these abusers start to feel like they're losing that power, now is the time that they're stepping up their game. Curtie, you know, how would you advise someone now, on top of what Sarah has said, or repeat? I don't mind, but
Yes.
what would you be saying?
Well, exactly as Sarah has said, all the same things, to utilize what is available. One very good scheme, which I've heard people have been utilizing, is that you're allowed out for essential shopping up until now. And the scheme that that was set up at Boots Chemists, that you just approach any member of staff at Boots Chemist and let them know that you're in trouble, and they will make provisions. They will take you to a safe space. They've got cordoned off or private rooms where they'll take you, and from there on they can call the police or they can call refuge, and they can lead the process from there on. So this scheme set up with Boots Pharmacists is excellent from what I've heard. I've also heard that in other areas, grassroots organizations have set up similar schemes using local grocery shops or local independent chemists and things, where any woman can go into one of them and just give a nod or just have a word with any staff member and somehow let it be known that they're in trouble. One other thing I would say about calling the police is, if you are locked in the house and everything is kicking off and you can't actually talk on the phone, if you're calling from your mobile phone, you dial 999 and then you can't talk, but you could maybe press 55. If you press 55 after it's been answered, it goes straight through to a domestic violence helpline. It goes straight through to the police officers who are trained to deal with. So they'll be able to hear what's going on. They'll also be able to dispatch a car to come to your address. Hopefully location services are set on your phone. The second thing about calling the police, if you can, dial 999 from your landline. If you've got a landline, dial 999 from that, tuck the phone to one side somewhere, but leave it on that. And the police will be able to hear what's going on, and they will immediately have your location because it's a landline. So they'll be able to come much swifter than possibly a mobile phone call. Because with the mobile phone call, we all know that these perpetrators, usually if they're that domineering and that controlling, they'll be controlling their victims' gadgets. They'll be controlling her phone, her iPad, her laptop, any gadgets, because they're controlling. So they'll control every aspect of communication that she has with the outside world. So if you can sneak to your landline, dial 999, then chuck a cushion or something over it so that the perpetrator can't see it, but the police will get that. They'll get what's going on, and bang, they'll have your location. So they'll be able to dispatch a car. Apart from that, it's everything that Sarah's covered.
I have a question for Jackie and Donna. So, you know, we've talked a lot about the individual, we've talked a lot about the police, we've talked a lot about the government and so on, and that's great and fun. What can families do? Because very often domestic abuse is known, you know? That's certainly been my experience. Whether it's your friend, whether it's your sister, your cousin, people know.
Mm-hmm.
People tend to know. And I know it's a dicey subject, you know, to go, but is there anything at all that a concerned friend, family member, is there anything they can do?
I've been saying to women that I've been working with, we put messages out, get into people's business. This is one time you can be fast and be in someone's business. If you think that somebody is being abused in any way, shape and form, even if you're wrong, it's better to be wrong than, you know, than not do anything. Get in their business and either make that phone call yourself and raise your concerns. In particular, if there are children involved, knock on that door, check on that person, because very often it's like, oh, we don't come between man and woman or woman and woman, you know, get involved, get in between, just somehow make a way to find out popping on that person, hi, I'm just popping around, you will generally, if you know that person, you're generally going to be able to say, actually, you don't look right, or something's not right. That person might be able to give you a little nod or whatever, make themselves available to that person, tell that person, you know, if you need to run out to my house or make that call, or, you know, just make themselves available, get involved, don't leave it to somebody else. It is our business and we are our sister's keeper. So we have to get out there, get in their business and take some action.
Donna?
Don't sit back and wait
I
for
would-
somebody else.
Oh,
Sorry.
sorry, Jackie. Sorry. No. For me, I think in Black and Asian cultures, the first places of judgment are often in our homes, amongst our sibling groupings, amongst extended family. And as somebody who is not naturally akin, for me, this is, you know, this whole subject, and I was honored that Paul asked me to speak because this has been a learning curve. I am from that. Well, how the hell did she put herself in that situation in the first place? Because of my personality type. And it was funny because this week I was having a conversation with a practitioner here locally to Croydon, and I was sharing with her my journey. Like, you know, I remember when I was going through my training, I thought they were going to throw me out because I was sat next to a survivor and we were watching a DVD, and I was like, but this is madness. Then, you know, take up something heavy and licking in my head. What you like? This is because this is my personality. And so for me, I have had to learn and unlearn some of the mindset that goes with this subject of blame, of, well, you must be weak to allow that. And for me, it's about getting those messages out into the community, into families, because as the practitioner said to me, oh my God, you're so weak, is about 3 women's silence. You might be the person that they thought they could come to, but just with that statement, they already know from what you said, you don't think I'm worth it. You think that my actions hold no value. And that can often be the stumbling block from them saying anything, perhaps being signposted to more efficient services outside of the family. So for me, Paul, in answer to your question, it is about creating spaces. And when I see online, recently in the group that we're both on, somebody said, well, I'm not a weak woman, this wouldn't happen to me. And I had to go, but it rested on my heart the whole night. And I went back to the post and I had to say, sis, I like you, that would be my first reaction. But actually, are we not doing our sister a disservice? And as women, we do this a lot. We do this in terms of sexual violence as well. Well, look at her. She was wearing a 2-inch miniskirt. She was asking for it. It's not just men. It's about in this space as well as females, admitting and acknowledging that there are those of us amongst us who might quietly think, well, she's a bit of an idiot anyway. So if he smacked her about, what's she expect? And owning that and saying, no, we have to change the mindset, because families are often the first step in that judgment piece and the first step to you getting help. So for me, and as a community influencer, it's about challenging mindsets of families. It's about challenging the mindset of strong individuals who might see it as a weakness. It's just the way somebody else copes. It doesn't mean that they're weak. There's not levels to this thing. Pain is pain, trauma is trauma. Just because yours might be manifested in a different way doesn't mean that a next person's is kind of, you know, lacks any kind, is deficient, is what I'm trying to say. So for me, it's about going into families and expanding knowledge and kind of having conversations.
And Paul, can I just add to that, please, that domestic abuse has no respect for persons, because I have seen people in jobs that are, you know, high jobs within their organizations who are going through that, and because of the way that probably people perceive things stops them from speaking, because I shouldn't be going through that. One of the things that constantly came back to me when I shared my story, it was you going through, you who's so strong. You, for a long time I had an issue with the terminology, this strong Black woman, because it didn't allow for my vulnerability and for me to say, actually, I need some help, because you were the person that was always helping everybody else and you were all right, you're okay, you can cope. So I think you're absolutely right. We have to have those conversations. We need to be working alongside of barbershops and hairdressers and places where people go to start having those conversations, to raise it so it's not taboo, so that it's not acceptable and people are actually beginning to challenge. Men will know men who are doing that to women. They shouldn't sit comfortably in your presence without being challenged. So we need to take it down to that level. We need to get into the churches, the mosques, those places where they have an audience of people and get them talking about it and saying, actually, we're not going to tolerate this. But, you know, we do need to have that conversation where we're not looking at it in judgment, because it could, and I probably felt like you. I had a friend that was going through that before I went through, and I was thinking, what the heck are you staying there for? Why? Get up and leave. Until you're going through it yourself, you realize it is not as easy as people think. So we need to be very supportive of our sisters and, you know, start them conversations at the very grassroots level going up.
Can I just say, Paul, just to add on to that, also with our young people, now it's funny, during one of our online tea and biscuits conversations, somebody that you know well said her son recently got called by the police. His friend had done something to his girlfriend, so his friend and his girlfriend had, you know, obviously it had become a domestic violence situation, and her son, who is his best friend, got called, and she was like, "What are you getting called to the police for?" To police station. And he was like, "Oh." So when they went down there, it then came out, "Listen, you're close to this guy. Is there anything you can tell us about the relationship? Did you see it's coming?" And these are people in their 20s, early 20s. It's not big people, yeah? And one of the points that she made, I think is very strong, is when her son came back and he explained that this was the situation, she was like, "So, okay, you might not have seen anything, but when have you ever heard him say anything?" And he checked himself. He was like, "Well, actually, there's been a couple of occasions that we're all together." And he said a few things that I thought, She said she was encouraging her son, "Listen, that's the point, to check it. That's the point in these male spaces, as well as these female spaces." That's why when Jackie said about barbershops, it's really important where a man might come in there. You know, barbershops are like little parliaments, aren't they, as our hairdressers?
That's
When you
right.
come in there and you vent off and you talk about women and you talk about the way you treat your woman and whatever, and what if she not get my dinner ready? All of those things that people listening will be like, "Yeah, I've heard that. I've seen that behavior." Those are the points at which that kind of behavior has to be not just checked to stop, but conversation started. So what we're having here is important, but we need to be in barbershops. We need to be speaking to our young men
Absolutely.
about yes meaning yes and no meaning no. We need to have this conversation. If they see these things in their young as they are, in their groupings, in their friendship circles, we empower them to, you know, hold that check. Say to your brethren, I mean, you really can't roll, you know, because I'm not really about that life. So if that's what you want to pursue, yeah, we can be friends, but I can't roll with you like that. We have to put these things in the vacuum that is created with the lack of resources, Paul. We have to return to a lot of communal things that we did before. And it's about putting the onus on one another and saying, when you see it, check it.
And also,
can I just add, because I have to go, sorry. So I just want to quickly add, there's just two things. For some women, this will be the first occurrence of domestic violence. It happened during the lockdown. Maybe there was some other relationship issues, but perhaps it was never physical. And because of the lockdown being a secondary factor, it has now become physical. That doesn't mean that you aren't, and if there are any listening, that you are not part of this conversation, and that just because it happened in the lockdown and it's only been a little push, or it's only been, you know, it's all part of the same tree. Okay. The second thing that I wanted to talk about is when we're looking at women that are in same-sex relationships, regardless of our own personal views, you know, the Black community can be very homophobic, it can be very transphobic, it can be very phobic. So when we're looking at women in same-sex relationships, or we're looking at trans women in relationships as well, we need to appreciate and understand that it's even more challenging for them to come forward, because when we hold judgments about, well, she's a big Black woman. You know, something happened to me one time and my brother turned around and went, "You're one of the mouthiest girls I know. What do you mean that happened?" And it's like, well, it happened, bro. Yeah. So we have to understand, sometimes women will say, well, how can you be experiencing domestic violence and you're with another woman? How does that work? It does happen, and we also need to recognize that, and we need to keep the doors of communication open and reserve our judgment, that we're not going to turn someone away because we don't agree with their sexuality or what gender they choose to identify with. It's very important, because people die, and there are a lot of trans women in particular who do die and are murdered because of domestic violence, and also because of sexual violence. So we need to recognize those things as well. And thirdly, when it comes to perpetrators, it is not the victim's responsibility to educate perpetrators. It is the male in the community to do that. So when Jackie's talking about getting into the barbershops, when you hear or you see your brethren just dealing with his baby mother in a particular way, or his ex-girlfriend in a particular way, very dubious of men that go, she's crazy. Every ex is crazy. The baby mother's crazy. Women are crazy. There's a problem, bro, because you are the common denominator. And when we're looking, because I've worked with perpetrators as well, when we're working with perpetrators, it has to be challenging the behavior. It's no excuses. It's not okay. It's not, I just lost it. No, you didn't, because you didn't lose it with the boss. You didn't lose it with the bus driver. You didn't lose it with your best mate. You lost it with the woman. And domestic violence is a weak and cowardly act that is rooted in power and control. So it's not our responsibility as women to educate men, and men also need to stop coming into the comment sections when we're having comments, when we're having discussions around gender-based violence, domestic violence, and talking with the whataboutery about, well, what about men? The dynamics of female to male domestic violence is completely different to the dynamics of male to female DV. And I'm just going to leave that there. But it's really for the men to stand up and say no to domestic violence, no to sexual violence, no to rape culture, no to victim blaming. Call it out when they see it, expose it when they see it, and let us know as women that we are safe and protected within our community. Our daughters are protected, okay? And we are protected. And many of us, if we're really honest, we grew up with DV or dysfunctionalism in our own homes. Let's break that cycle. Let's break it and break it and break it, and let the healing begin, because it's trauma. All of this is trauma. And I'm just saying, brothers, if you want to make a difference, and I'm not attacking you or blaming you, because anytime I talk about it, it's always, she's a feminist or she's a feminazi, whatever. Brothers, I'm saying, if you really want to make a difference, stand up and check yourselves first, and check your brethren second, and check the wider community, okay? It's not okay. Women are dying. Black women are dying. There was one murder that happened during the lockdown, and it was a woman, I think it was in Barking, and basically he burned down her house and she died in the house. You've got to understand, we can get really angry and outraged, and I'm ranting and I'm going to stop in a minute. We can get really angry and outraged at what's going on across the pond, but we really have to look at what's going on within our own communities, and we have to start standing up. The brothers especially have to start standing up and calling it out. If you are a perpetrator and you feel like, you know what, I'm going to kick off, ring one of your male brethren and say to him, yo, boss, come and collect me in it. I need time out. You don't have to turn around and assault your partner. You don't have to do that. There is another way.
Look, I'm gonna take that as your closing statement, Sarah.
Yeah.
But I want to just say something, not just for you guys on the panel, but also for people who are listening, because very, very much when we do talk about domestic abuse, we tend to focus on physical. And I want it to be crystal clear to anybody listening that there are other bits and pieces which I'm going to say are just as bad. And those are definitely some of the parts and bits that are being affected by this lockdown. So you talk about the isolating of people from their families. Yeah, where a woman typically is isolated from her friends, isolated from her family. She's subjected to all sorts of verbal abuse. Yeah, I manage and nobody laugh or asks how comes. I saw a soap, I think it's called EastEnders, sorry, on TV, where this lady was being abused by her partner. And I happened to see the episode where he made her take her clothes off. Yeah, and I know it's fiction, but it's not. Yeah, I know that writer is coming from a place of truth. Yeah, so we need to remember that there may be some people who are watching this Zoom today who are thinking, well, I haven't hit her, so it's all good. Yeah, I've never touched her, so they're not talking about me. Actually, we are. We're talking about you who are so controlling. you who are denying her money, you who are locking her from her family. Yeah, all of those things still constitute abuse. And I think it's very, very important that we don't go away from today's session with this impression that, you know what, well, I didn't touch her, so it's all good. You shouted so loud that she felt she couldn't stand up, that she cried, that she wept, that she's afraid to talk to you tomorrow. It's all abuse. And definitely, I know, you know, I don't have many friends, and, you know, there are many reasons why I don't. But I know in the small group of guys that we hang out, we try to keep each other accountable. Yeah, and we try to do. And you know what? I'm not saying for a moment we're perfect. I'm certainly not perfect. Yeah, but I do believe that that male accountability, yeah, where we look over each other's shoulders and say, I'm not so sure that's the right thing to do, Paul. You might want to think differently about that. It's definitely a starting point. Yeah, as everybody has articulately said, we can't ask the ladies to fix this one. This one's about us. So what I'm going to ask you guys to do is just give me your closing statements, and remember that there are going to be people in the chat who will be really fired up by this conversation. So if you can go to the chat, Paul Lawrence, Idle Yardie, whatever you want to call it, and what, you never heard the Idle Yardie thing before? I see you smiling.
I've heard it.
Yeah. So what I want you guys to do is put whatever contact details you are happy for people to contact you on. Yeah. Put what you can do, what you can't do, what you're doing in the future, how people can stay in touch with you, because, you know, it's really no point we have these discussions, then we go away from them, and it's all forgotten. The sad thing is that DV has been with us forever. And, you know, with all our talk about civilization and development, here we are, 2020, having a conversation that I could have had back in 1974. And it would have been more or less exactly the same conversation. And that's a tragedy, and that's a huge blemish on our so-called developed world and developed society, that we are still in that place where we're having the same conversation. But you know what? When I think about it, we're having the same conversation on a number of topics. So probably the reality is that I am being overly optimistic about our progress. Sarah, bye-bye. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks. It's been great, guys. And I'll see you on the other side.
Jackie, you want to give us your roundup bit?
I would just say that domestic abuse, it's everyone's problem. It's not just the victim, it's not just the perpetrator, it's not just those on the ground, it's everyone's problem. And if we all do our little bit, you know, it's, they say, one coke and fills basket, or everyone's chipping with the axe, the tree will fall down. We've all got to do our bit, and it's not somebody else's problem, it belongs to all of us. And I just wanted to add something as well, that we have to teach our daughters very, very early about what is a healthy relationship, and to recognize that very, very early on. So I'll just say that.
Look, I'm just going to add to that and say, you know, the organization that I'm a part of for the last 20 years, the 100 Black Men of London, and part of that ethos is about demonstrating through leadership and role modeling what is the right and wrong behavior. And so when we say we need to teach our daughters, yes, but we also need to teach our sons. We definitely need to teach our sons what a functioning relationship looks like, and try not to let them make the same mistakes we made. You know, I didn't get it right first time either. But it's very, very important that we model, so our young girls know what a sensible relationship looks like, and what our boys know what a sensible, decent relationship looks like. Curtie.
That's exactly what I was going to say, that we need to start educating the young, because we need to build up our girls' self-esteem, their confidence levels, because these are all the things I see when they come into university. They're 18 years old and they're always on the back foot. So we need to build up their confidence and self-esteem to say, you don't need to accept bad behavior from anyone. Not from your father, not from your brother, not from your boyfriend, not from anyone. You don't need to accept bad behavior. And for the boys as well, it starts from when they're small, like for mothers and aunties and uncles and dads and brothers to say to them, no, you don't treat your sister like that. And then as they get older, no, you don't treat your girlfriend like that. So it has to start right from the beginning. For the girls and the boys, we need to teach them what is and what isn't acceptable, respectful, good behavior towards each other. And as a community, I think we need to keep shouting it out loud and clear, all of us, you know, community champions or community ambassadors, but also, you know, just seep it out there into the community so that the perpetrators know that this is not acceptable behavior, and there are people who are going to call you out on it, so that they're not going around with that air of confidence, knowing that, oh, okay, they can do whatever they like because nobody's going to call them out. So they don't have that arrogance and that confidence. And we also need to shout out again as community champions, ambassadors, and anybody else that we can get our voice to shout out as well to the victims, that you don't need to accept this. And also, we're here for you. Tell us what you need. Even if you want to talk to us privately in confidence and you don't want to air your laundry in public, it's okay, because we're here for you and we're going to support you to get out of it if that's all you want. But otherwise, to both perpetrators and victims, we as a community need to make it loud and clear, raise our voices and say, we need to send a message to perpetrators, we need to send a message to the victims, and just send it out there.
Thank you. Just before, let me just quickly go back to Jackie. Jackie, what's the name of your organization? Because somebody has just come on and they didn't get to hear the names of the organization. So just again, what's your name of your organization? Where are you based?
Women of Worth, and we're online, so that's global. So it's Women of Worth, but in brackets, if they put Empower, and they'll find us. Or if they can contact me on Facebook, it's JB Burton on Facebook.
All right, thank you. Curtie, just again, the name of how people could find you, just for anybody who can't get onto Facebook later.
Okay, so my name's Curtie Sony. I've got my Facebook profile, so you can send me a private message on Facebook. We also run COVID-19 mental health support group, and it's through there that we've been getting a lot of these queries coming in either on the page or by private message. And so we've set up a separate domestic abuse tab on there. So if you come through there, even if you just want online support to help you survive whatever you're going through, it's there. And if you need extra practical help, we have other people in the team who could walk you through it and get you extra help. So that's COVID-19 mental health support group on Facebook, and my own private message me on Curtie Sony on Facebook.
Thank you. Donna Murray Turner.
Okay, so if you want to get in touch with me, it's Donna Murray Turner. Alternatively, on all social networks, I think excluding Snapchat and TikTok, you can contact Another Night of Sisterhood at I'm gonna have to spell it, people. So it's ANOS IS Terhood. So it's just Anos Sisterhood, Anos Sisterhood, really, on all social platforms, and one of us will get in contact with you. And that's it. Yeah, that's
a closing statement. Come on.
Oh well, I was listening to both Curtie and Jackie speak, and I was thinking everything they said. Of course, I can't disagree with. I heartily agree with. But I like to remove it back one step further. Change starts with you. Change and education starts with you. So if you are not educating yourself and changing your mindset, and even if it's not you changing it, you might be watching this live and you might be having some questions, but if you don't receive the information, if you don't receive the message that we're trying to, a change has got to come, but it's never going to change if we stick to the same old mindset. So for me, it's about encouraging people to just consider their mindset. And then we can go forward and talk about how we interact, and we kind of have that whole kind of conversation with our young people in our homes or in our care and with our wider families. But people often think that community is something out there. Oh, my community.
Yes.
Your community starts with you. Your community starts with your family, with your, even without children, with your family grouping. So it is about educating yourself. Be ready to receive That's a real problem we have in our community. We're really good at prescribing. We're not often we don't have the same level for receiving. And just to let any victims out there that are listening and can hear my voice, we've got you. We are here. And whilst it might not be my lived experience, I empathize and I'm here to help you and support you in any way I can. And if there are any of those big whale organizations out there, some of those heads are listening, know this. Every day bucket go well, one day the bottom must drop out. You've got to remain culturally competent and relevant in this thing. This thing is ever changing. Who knew about COVID-19? Nobody. Who knew that all of these services are now going to have to be put online? So, you know, again, put aside your ego, some of you world organizations, and reach out to those of us, my sister, other people who are efficient and very well, you know, specialized in this area. Don't think you can do it all and then you flop just for the funding. Put your ego aside and really try and make some impact. After all, you are funded to do so. So really try and make a difference and reach out. And for the perpetrators, you know, I've spoken to many men. I'm a woman who's, you know, I'm blessed with 8 uncles, and there's a lot of men in my family in general. And often it's an inability to articulate their emotions. So again, if you're a father and you have sons, or you're in your grouping and you notice, just have a conversation about that. Like, how do people feel when they're frustrated? How do you communicate to other people that you're frustrated? Have conversations about it. I know that conversations is this thing that people have stopped doing, and it's almost like we're reinventing the wheel. But all we've done this afternoon is have a massive conversation. Look how much impact it's going to make. So again, have more conversations. Put down the devices, switch off the television, and just say, yo, bro, how do you feel? Because I feel this way. When I'm frustrated, I feel like I want to lick down a man. How do you feel? Just have a conversation. You don't know the impact, and you might just save somebody's life.
You know what? I'm going to stop doing this show because the people who come on this show always make me look bad. Yeah, and it's happened again today. All 4 of you just make me look very average. Yeah, so I guess you know what, we set out just to have a conversation about things, and I try not to put too much emphasis on any great outcomes. And what I've learned, not just, you know, in doing these series of shows, but what I've learned over the years is that, as Donna said, when you start to have a conversation, that's the beginning of something bigger. That's the beginning of some sort of change. And I'm hoping that someone out there, whether you're a survivor, whether you're in the middle of it right now, whether you're a perpetrator, I'm just hoping that you're starting to think a little bit different. You don't have to still do today what you did yesterday. You know, your path is not absolutely nailed down in one way. You can get a different tomorrow, but it comes from effort. You know, it comes out of effort. I've known of people who have been in abusive relationships for years, and they have surprised themselves after years by getting out. Yeah. I know it's not easy. You know, the statistics tell us it's not easy. You know, we know that 16% of all violent crime is domestic crime, but we also know that it is the least reported. So all our statistics that we're mouthing off at, actually, they're probably a lot lower than what's really going on out there, because there's so much that's not reported and won't be reported. What I'm hoping people will take from today's discussion is that there is help out there. And this help is not waiting on the big funding. This help is not waiting on the big organizations. This help is in your communities. It's your brothers, your sisters, your aunts, your uncles. It's the people who've been on this chat today. Yeah. And I just want to thank everybody, both in terms of my panel and in terms of the people who have tuned in to listen to what we all had to say. And I guess it's a very appropriate time to say we need to look after each other. And looking after each other includes watching and making sure that everybody else is safe. It's been great doing the show today. I hope people have enjoyed it. We will be back next week with another show. And I guess it's time for me to say goodbye, because I said this is supposed to be a 1 hour show and we've gone way over your time. But thank you guys very, very much on the panel for joining us. And thank everybody out there in Facebook land.